Thank you. It's really good to be here. Thank you for inviting us. Good afternoon, everybody. I am speaking today. If you saw on your agenda, I slightly changed the title. I was invited to speak about the social process of getting green infrastructure into regulation. I changed that title slightly to use the word system change instead of regulation, because in particular in our community, the groundswell of community support has really been what instigated a lot of green infrastructure, and I don't want to forget that important part of the puzzle. And also, regulations isn't everybody's end goal, but it is also another important part of the picture. Throughout my presentation, I want to use this framework of thinking. It is a model that's used in the field of health for understanding social change, but you can also use it to think about communication channels through our society and other forms of change. On the outer circle, you see regulations in the environment, and you can think of this as a top-down model where communication downward helps to serve and influence the individuals in the culture. And then from the inside out, that our identity and our understanding and our capabilities as individuals end up influencing our environment and regulations. But stepping back a little bit, I wanted to talk to you about my work. Pima Association of Governments is directed by the Regional Council. So we have all the local towns and Native nations within Pima County as our board of directors. And we also, so we're charged with cross-jurisdictional planning, which is really great for watershed planning because watershed issues cross these town boundaries. We also have departments in transportation and air, and green infrastructure is one of those approaches that really helps to integrate these programs and provides opportunities for integrated planning. I'm going to do my best to represent several of our partner jurisdictions and community voices that I work with, because what we do is collaborative planning. So first, I'll start with speaking about some of our community efforts, sort of the roots of our green infrastructure movement. And then I'll speak about municipal staff roles. I don't want to understate the importance that I see that staff also have in providing green infrastructure progress. Then I want to step back a little bit and speak about communication in general and how important it is at each of these levels. And finally, that top-down political level of green infrastructure implementation. In our community, just like any community, there are certain unique features that might drive green infrastructure. In particular, we have heat and it's dry. So naturally, the desire to mitigate that heat and to improve our water situation are major motivators for green infrastructure. And another unique feature is that we have that large grassroots support for green infrastructure and a long-term history of that. A fourth element that is unique about the West in general is that we have separated sewers. So the storm sewers are not combined with the sanitary sewers. And we were finding that we saw increasing use of green infrastructure in the eastern states of the U.S. That were mostly driven by sanitary sewer overflows and therefore violations of stormwater quality standards. And then the cities had to make up for these problems by implementing green infrastructure, since it could help mitigate flooding and mitigate the pollutants. So we saw that that was really a unique aspect, once again, that our community had a huge groundswell of support for green infrastructure without the pollutant problems. Additionally, because we don't have the combined sewers, our streets have been designed to convey our water in Tucson, so that's why you see those flooded streets whenever we have a huge storm. But what this creates is also an opportunity, because our storm sewers have already been daylighted, and all we have to do is connect that stormwater back into our landscape to help heal our watershed. So I wanted to feature just a few of our community groups that have been really influential in Pima County. And I wanted to point out that each of these groups has really worked on creating an assets-based approach That means they really work on emphasizing the positive instead of the scarcity in our community. So that first one is Green for All. They're a national group, but they have a local headquarters here, and they're really a partnership. They work with groups like Thierry Libertad, and they really move for climate justice. I really love their slogan. They have, they believe in an inclusive green economy strong enough to lift people out of poverty, and they really aim to be informed by those who are most impacted by unequal distribution of government services. The next one to the right is Watershed Management Group, and one highlight from their efforts I wanted to share was their bond raising model. So this is a co-op program where people can help chip in to help their neighbors out and help others out in the community to implement green infrastructure on the landscape, and then in return earn credits towards getting the same done for their own house. Also, you already heard Brad speak today, and you heard how he emphasizes turning waste into resources, which is really asset-based approach. We also have Stream Dynamics attending today from New Mexico, and one of our local groups, the Cienega Watershed Partnership, brought in these experts from New Mexico to help several years ago create practitioners locally who could work in rural areas and help heal the landscape. Because we saw a great need for our own local practitioners instead of always bringing in people from out of state. And finally, out of these community groups, I wanted to highlight Trees for Tucson. They use the Promotoras model, which is also from the health field. And the idea there is that you work with individuals who are already leaders in the community and use them as sort of a conduit so that you are being informed by the community and not just reaching out, but engaging. Another reason all these groups have been so successful is Arizona is one of the top 5 states with the most nonprofit organizations per capita. And we also have a strong history of the neighborhood associations having a very strong voice at the table with their city council members. And that's been a really important strategy for the community locally. So in our region, well, as you can see across the US, the heat impacts is really an environmental justice issue. Many times people think of heat stress as something that we're locally adapted to in the desert, that we know how to choose certain behaviors that keep us protected or that we have air conditioning. But studies are showing that, in fact, there are certain people, of course, who don't have access to things such as air conditioning or have mobility restrictions that make them more disproportionately impacted by heat waves. Additionally, we seem to wave off the importance of mitigating heat stress, but I wanted to emphasize its importance with that quote on the left. Heat stress is actually the #1 weather-related cause of death in the US, and in particular Arizona has the highest rates of heat mortality. So it's a very serious issue. As I move from describing some of our community-based efforts into municipal planning, I want to emphasize that that asset-based approach is still important at any level. And this is a nice chart you can read the details of later, and I've made sure to put citations in all my slides too if you want to download these later. But the asset-based approach looks for commonalities between stakeholders and sees the community as having something to offer, and provides a way to take control of the environment so that people, as Edith was saying, don't feel as disenfranchised, or those that have been disenfranchised have an opportunity to take control. As I address some of the municipal efforts, I wanted to highlight some of the professional tools that we have available locally, the strategic planning efforts that we've been working on, the importance of collaboration in our past demonstration sites, and the creation of standards and guidance that happens at this level of work. Brad showed this map briefly in his presentation as well. It's a new tool that we've developed both for the community and municipal planners to help highlight where there's areas of need, where there's disproportionate heat impact, or where there's lower distribution of canopy. PAG flies the aerial remote sense data that helped us to delineate where all the individual trees are in our region. And so Trees for Tucson and the Mayor's 10,000 Tree campaign used this map to highlight where they should do outreach to help get additional trees planted in our community. Also, the layers of this map have been tested out, so it's sort of in a beta state right now. We're taking input on how to develop this tool to be more useful for everybody, but WMG also has used this to help highlight where green infrastructure can be best implemented to mitigate flood issues. So the idea behind this is that community groups can highlight an area, establish the need for a certain neighborhood, and use that in their grant applications, and it could help bring in funding into the region to help address these issues and help prioritize where our limited resources go as municipalities. We looked at this EPA guidance in 2009 and saw that they showed sort of a pathway towards low impact development or green infrastructure. I use those words pretty interchangeably to mean the same thing. And they recommended that we do an inventory of progress in the region, and so not just the barriers, but our assets in the community. And we found that although the terms green infrastructure and low impact development weren't used in this history of policies and efforts and educational efforts, the principles showed up in many different policies. So we have an inventory of over 70 policies, and it really highlighted to people working in the low impact development field the importance of using shared terminology, that it really strengthened our efforts when we coordinated. And the use of terms like LID really spoke more to our leaders, and it spoke well to engineers instead of just referring to the elements of green infrastructure, such as the shade trees or the curb cuts or the rainwater harvesting. Some of the policies that are in that inventory show that we have a strong background in policies that really laid the foundation for the development of green infrastructure policies. These early ordinances, such as the Water Wasting Ordinance and the Xeriscape Landscaping Ordinance in Tucson, were created at a time when our groundwater levels were dropping rapidly, and we didn't have the Colorado River imported yet to Tucson. And so it's sort of that crisis-like situation that instigated a lot of change at the government level at that time. But these also reinforce the message that it's unethical and unlawful to waste water in our region, and that creates a great foundation for the development of further green infrastructure policies. And in the future, as we reach higher drought stages, which will be declared, it's predicted, within the next couple years as the Colorado River waters decrease, we have in place drought plans that will restrict outdoor irrigations in order to keep our supply around longer. And so we hope that by utilizing stormwater, we'll have a more resilient tree canopy over the long haul. Julia Fonseca might touch on this later, but another instrumental founding policy was our Pima County Sonoran Desert Landscape System, a conservation plan with the conservation land system. And this was instigated by some endangered species concerns, but has that more broad scale protection of green infrastructure. So this animation just helps to represent that rising tide of municipal support we saw through our inventory of regulations, guidelines, implementation of projects, and growth of education. And more recently, we've been helping to conduct studies that show the correlated and measured benefits to our economy and heat island mitigation. I'm very fond of the EPA guidance that helps you to make a plan for green infrastructure, and we followed this somewhat, but we've also found that assessing your local needs and assets has really been more productive for us, so this is more of a broad guidance that we've used. Evan Canfield at the Regional Flood Control District helped to form this low impact development working group, and we have people from every sector invited to join and participate. We have nonprofits and professional trades, multiple jurisdictions and multiple departments, and this is a great place for professionals to collaborate, keep the momentum of low impact development going, and work to identify challenges together. Should I wrap up? Should I wrap up?
I'm sorry?
Okay.
Muchísimas gracias. ¿Todavía no? No.
Do you know how much time I have left?
Oh, you still have time. A few minutes, a few more minutes.
Thank you. Sorry.
Sorry.
We also have a stormwater quality management working group, and through this we provide training to the industry. There's lots of people out there who want to comply, they just need the educational resources. And this has been a great way for us to be prepared for top-down regulation that's coming from the federal government that's increasingly required the low-impact development approach to stormwater quality. We've hosted workshops to help engage more broadly in the community, and recently awarded several case study sites this helps bring prestige to some of our professionals, as well as provide examples to the public. And Sandy Bolduc was here earlier today. She helped to lead this case studies catalog. And I highly recommend these local level workshops because we've used them to create goals for our community and then use broader input for creating the next achievable steps that we can work on for the next couple of years. I wanted to provide one more story of that provides sort of a model similar to the curb cut story in town. And this sort of makes the case for the value of municipal guidance. Val Little in 1988 did a survey of Arizona and found that 13% of residents were using greywater, but all illegally, as illegal at that time. Yet there was a strong demand for it. She wanted to provide education to teach safety of greywater use. So that's water from people's showers and laundry and such. But because of these restrictive standards, she wasn't able to even provide that education. So she worked really hard to change the system to allow guidelines, and now anybody who follows those guidelines is legal without a permit or fees or inspections required. And this is very similar to the curb cut story. The first people who implemented them were doing them illegally, but now we have standards to make it easy for others to follow that example. And it's legal as long as you follow those standards. And I kind of see the composting toilets as possibly following that model as well. There's several people who already implement systems that aren't safe, but they're doing it by necessity. Maybe they're off the grid. And Watershed Management Group is piloting a study to show that safety standards can make this possible for people to implement. If you recognize what's in the squares there, those are the same words that were in that early diagram with the spheres of influence of social change. And if you used a negative approach and didn't have the means to implement green infrastructure, you might say the terms, I can't do that here. But we think we can flip that around and switch that sentence into a positive thing with the provision of guidelines to help people know how to make a difference. So then you would be able to say, I value and understand green infrastructure and understand the benefits of it in my work and my life. This is just a snapshot of those guidelines. They really have helped. They just came out last month, and I think Lynn Orchard is here, who helped to gather this manual together. But the idea is to help engineers and contractors to comply with this approach. And it really helps to innovate these strategies. I've already spoken a lot about the value of communication and the importance of listening, the importance of sharing common terminology. And I also wanted to emphasize the importance of research towards communicating the value of green infrastructure, as well as marketing, which is more of a top-down approach from the political level. I won't go into detail on these, you'll hear more about them later, but these are two examples of studies that really speak to more people, the value of green infrastructure for flooding, as well as economic return. These are helping to break barriers of understanding, and that's really the goal, to identify those barriers and help to break them. Pima County has conducted surveys to see how frequently people are implementing rainwater harvesting in their landscape and how they perceive these issues, and they're finding that about 20 to 40% of the community is already implementing green infrastructure. So if we look at a marketing model, that shows that we're in this early adoption to late to early majority phase. Once you reach 50%, the theory is that society takes it from there with peer pressure and knowledge sharing. This could be an ongoing challenge for us because we have a very transient community. We're full of, we have a lot of students and people who retire here, so the community is constantly challenging. So we might end up sticking right there, right around the pre-critical mass area for a while. But we have developed outreach to help teach newcomers about our approach to living, water conservation, and value of our washes. We've tied our stormwater quality message into rainwater harvesting, since a lot of people are already into rainwater harvesting, but not many people were aware of stormwater quality issues and how they can help. So we've even tied into rainwater harvesting to help get the message out there, so that people are already inclined to want to learn about rainwater harvesting will now learn about our stormwater pollution issues as well. We also teach a sense of heritage and the importance of our washes and recognizing the species that rely on these areas. So finally, looking at the political level, we've found support from not only the EPA, as I mentioned before, but looking at FEMA and their newer regulations that incorporate LID into their flood hazard compliance. It really helps to legitimize our efforts locally when we can point to the national level. And at the local level, a couple great stories come from the development of the rainwater harvesting ordinance for commercial properties. That the story there is that it's really important to have a champion at the city council that can help bring this through and create it into ordinance. The story with the Tucson Department of Transportation's creation of the Green Streets policy is that it couldn't have been done without a grant that Watershed Management Group, a nonprofit group, received, and that gave it energy and organization to help create those guidelines. And then that regulations aren't always the solution. Sometimes incentives are more important, because sometimes people will avoid regulations because it's easier just to pay a fine. So instead, we would encourage incentives, such as the new detention retention manual that allows sort of a type of credit toward your detention requirements by using rainwater harvesting. We also have regional council resolutions that support rainwater harvesting. This is another great top-down approach. Our newest one emphasizes the value to our transportation system, safety for pedestrians, the value of toward our economy. And these resolutions have been cited in applications for awards and helped our community to gain more recognition, which in turn speaks back to our political leaders about the value of their support of green infrastructure. And finally, we would all love to have this be a publicly funded service for the community. At this time, it comes from the general fund and from grants that the community applies for. And many people are looking into doing willingness to pay surveys, but we can't forget how important it was from the very beginning that the community support was what got us here in the first place. I don't expect you to read this, but this is just several different ways that people used to evaluate social change. And rather than just choosing one approach, a top-down approach or a bottom-up approach, I picked and chose different pieces that really fit our community because I see it as a really cyclical process that we've been in for many years. A great feedback loop between several different sectors. So, thank you.